Welcome to Managing Website Projects, Managing the Project. Brought to you by the Digital Empowerment Project, a nationwide initiative organized by the 6 U.S. regional museum associations and dedicated to providing free, self-paced training resources for small museums. The inaugural series of online trainings focused on digital media and technology topics is made possible by the funding for the Institute for Museum Library Services. My name is Justin Jakovac. I'm the Executive Director of the Mountain Plains Museums Association, and I am your host for today's program. I am pleased to introduce Despy Mays today. Despy is the founder and lead strategist of Bluebird, a marketing consultancy focused on serving solopreneurs, startups, and nonprofits. Her marketing career has spanned nearly 2 decades and crisscrossed through nonprofits, consumer brands, agencies, and the startup world. She has led digital marketing and interactive technology projects in collaboration with museums ranging from the Terre Haute Children's Museum to the Musée du Louvre, plus many corporate clients from local farms to Fortune 500 companies. Despy is a below-average guitar player, an above-average mixologist, loves beekeeping, prefers listening to music on vinyl, and reading books in hard copy. She also founded Give and Take Indie in 2019, a completely volunteer-led effort helping neighbors in Indianapolis facing food insecurity by hosting mini food pantries. In 2021, Give and Take Indie is in 4 neighborhoods and has launched a community donation garden. I'm very pleased to bring you Despy today.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm really excited to be here and share this content with you. I am going to just jump right in and start sharing my screen so that you can see my presentation. I'm actually starting today with a little bit of review because I know that not everybody who is with us today has necessarily seen the content in the first 2 workshops, and it's kind of necessarily relevant for what we're going to talk about today. So just 2 slides, so not a ton if you did happen to attend both of those. So today we're going to talk about managing web projects, the actual nuts and bolts of how you get it done. And so the reason I'm starting with a little bit of review is that the first 2 sessions we talked about planning and content, and those are really inseparable from talking about the overall managing of your web project. So the first part of that overview is just how you get started. And somebody asked this question at the end of the last session. It's a really good one. If you're just deciding to embark on this project, what do you absolutely do first? And I would suggest that thing is set your goals and articulate what you're going to build and who you're building it for. And by starting there, you will set the stage for all the decisions that you'll make for the project, how you'll communicate about the project both internally and externally, and how you'll know when you're finished, which is a really important part of the project too. Making sure that you have all your bases covered with the right team. So that means you have a project lead, which might be you, or maybe it's somebody else, a content lead, a design lead, and a technical lead. And in that first workshop, I talk through this in more detail. Also, there are some great resources I'll talk about in a minute to support you in this. So even if you're a team of 1 in your museum, you still need to make sure you have all those bases covered because it's very, very difficult to do this all by yourself. So whether that's volunteers or interns or paid helpers. There's lots of ways to build that team, but it's important to do. The next step is documenting your requirements, and that means what you need the site to do, what systems you need the site to integrate with to support the work that you do, whether that's your collection or membership and ticketing or fundraising, like all those aspects. Make a laundry list of what you need the website project to accomplish. And then creating a minimum viable product or an MVP so that you know that you have this target that at the very minimum we have to do this amount, provide this amount of value, this amount of content, these features in order for this project to be successful. And when you do that, you streamline the scope of what you're trying to accomplish by a certain date so that you make it more feasible and more clear, so that your scope doesn't grow and grow and grow as you go throughout the process of doing your project. And then finally, you then build your timeline, and that kind of kicks off the start of the work on the project. All right, so that's some review from that planning phase and a little bit into the content discussion that we had last time. The resources that are available to support you in this, I created a goals worksheet to help you identify 4 different types of goals for web projects, so you should check that out. Job descriptions for those team members that you can use as a baseline for recruiting the folks that you need to help you with your website project. Documenting your requirements, both technical and content requirements. You can use this template to help you do that. And then I also provided a spreadsheet template for a project timeline with some suggested lengths of time based on the size of your website project. So yours might be a little different, but it'll give you a place to begin to start thinking about what you can accomplish in how much time. And then from the last module, I gave an overview of how to create a minimum viable product definition for your project that I think is really helpful. You should consider checking out if you're embarking on managing a new web project. So that's sort of the overview. So now some new stuff. I thought that choosing partners would be a really important thing to talk about, because if you're a non-technical leader or non-technical resource, this might be how you often feel about dealing with the person who's in charge of your technology. I know when I started working in my first agency, after I'd been in museums for a while, and I went and worked for a full service agency where we built websites and landing pages and emails and all that stuff. And there was a particular partner, external partner that we would sometimes work with that no one wanted to talk to because everyone felt like this. So it happens, and I want you to feel confident and prepared whenever you are interacting with a technical resource that you need to choose for your project. So the first thing to think about is asking the right questions. So as you're considering different partners for your particular project, you want to understand first, can they meet your project requirements? And what I mean by that is, do they have experience working with the types of technologies that are really important for your project? Ask them to tell you about that and how they can support both the systems and the types of content that you need. What is their typical process? And ask for a little more detail here. I think this is something that people often BS their way through, but it's really important to understand how a technical resource will collaborate with you. Because the worst thing is you do a bunch of planning, you come up with a site map, you do content, you create a design, and then you throw it over a wall to somebody who's going to build it, and you don't hear anything for weeks and weeks. And all of a sudden things are delayed and your launch date's in jeopardy, and that can happen. And especially if you feel nervous or unprepared to manage that technical resource, that can exacerbate that problem. So really lean into process and communication up front and nail down how you're going to do that, and then hold that resource accountable to both. So similarly, how do they keep in touch, and how will they escalate obstacles? And then what training will they provide you? This is something that gets overlooked too in our hunger to get our projects launched. Sometimes we forget about what happens once they launch and who owns what, and how does that transition from being an in-progress thing that's being built to a thing that's managed and owned by you after it's out in the world. So along with these questions, here are some good answers. So if you hear these kinds of answers from the partner, the potential partner you're talking to, I think you would be on the right track. So they'll be able to demonstrate that they understand really well what you're trying to accomplish, and be able to share examples of how they worked in the same or a similar system. I think sometimes it's hard because I know that Every industry has industry-specific software, and it can be hard to find somebody who's built in that specific thing. But they should be able to show you something adjacent to it that is relevant, that helps you make a good decision. And they also might be able to share with you the specific tools that they'll use to make your project successful. So either one of those or a combination of those is a really good answer to that requirements piece. And then they'll be able to describe to you a step-by-step process that leaves room for your input and anticipates whatever challenges are going to come along. Because we do not implement web projects without encountering something unexpected. It just does not happen. So, how will they handle it when that does happen? And then communication methods, this kind of relies on what you would find most helpful, but some folks use Slack in their internal communications, and so it can be helpful and natural to have client communication with Slack. If you're, working with somebody who's part of your organization, check-in meetings or email updates. Even if you're working with somebody external, this might be the best way. But make sure there's a single point of contact for escalation, both on your side and on their side, so that no matter what's going on, what the process is going to look like for getting help when you need it. And then the answer to the training question is that they'll offer a training session, like that should be a minimum, in person or remote, depending. And then sometimes written training materials provided, and or training video. If you are very familiar with creating your own YouTube content, YouTube has a really wonderful chaptering feature that you can use just by adding a time-stamped comment or description rather to your video. And that's a really great way to create a really cheap and fast training video. So if they don't offer that, consider asking for it, because you can go back to that. You can share that with other people in your organization, and you can just screen record a YouTube training session and then add those chapters in to make it easy to find the various updates that you might need to make to your site. And it's just a really great tool worth thinking about on the front end. And then how do you find these partners? That can be a hard thing too. I think the first thing I would suggest is asking your friends for referrals, especially on Facebook. And I know not everybody necessarily does professional stuff on Facebook, but I mostly use my Facebook account to find the most awesome. Right now I'm looking for somebody to, what's the word? I want to say edit, but that's not the right word. Tailor a leather jacket, So I'll go to Facebook and say, okay, who knows somebody who can do this? And it's amazing because, our network on Facebook is filled with friends and friends of friends and sometimes colleagues. And you can get really great insight, both positive and negative, about potential candidates for your project there. So I definitely recommend that. And then LinkedIn is another great referral opportunity. Same thing, but just a level up in terms of the professionalism maybe of the responses. So asking your network to give you ideas. I would share a few details of your project, whatever is relevant, so that people give you the right recommendations. So that could be the scope, like the size of the project, the type of technology you need help with, certain features that are important, so that you get good recommendations there. And then when you're Googling, I find it can be hard to Google the right thing. So just try different searches so that you get different types of results. Here are some suggestions on the types of things that you might Google. If you want to work with somebody locally, obviously you can add that local city name or whatever to help you narrow it down. But just some ideas to get you going there. I just mentioned, locally, should they be local? That's completely your call. Remote collaboration is more possible than it's ever been, but sometimes there is value in face-to-face. And also, I think sometimes investing in the local community is a great way to further the mission of your organization, Should they be a designer or a developer? Website designers, when people have that title, typically are focused on the visual part only. Developers are usually focused on the code only. And there are very rare, wonderful unicorns out there who can do both things, but they're harder to find. So you might need both, and doing searches for web designer developer might help you find somebody who can do both. Often creative agencies will have designers in-house that do design across lots of different channels, and then they'll outsource development. It's a really common practice. So you might need both. And then should they be WordPress experts or something else? It really depends on your project requirements. If you are looking to build a website that is informational, maybe has some visual content, WordPress certainly can support that. I think that often I encounter with clients that their CMS choices are mostly driven on the expertise of their teams and what they're comfortable using. And that's a fine reason to choose or not choose a system, in my opinion, because those are the people who have to use them, unless there's some technical reason why you need to choose something else. And if you're just not sure, you can kind of leave that open as you're searching for a partner and ask that partner to help you choose the right technology. That's certainly something people do. You just want to make sure that you're working with a partner you trust who really gets what you're trying to accomplish, so that they're able to recommend the thing that will really work best for you. Okay, so after you've chosen that partner and you've got a plan, here are some ideas to keep things moving, keep things on track. So the first thing I'll say is a little bit of process can go a long way. Creating a very complex, very detailed timeline or process for your web project is probably not going to help you very much in the long run, because it will change. And something I talked about in a previous workshop is, being agile, and in the technical sense, but also just the literary sense. Be flexible, because your project is going to change throughout the process of implementing it. You're going to encounter things you didn't think about that are going to cause you to adjust maybe what your MVP is, or what your priorities are for launch, or there's a million things that can happen, right? So having a lightweight process will make you flexible enough to get through those obstacles. Some ways to do that are by scheduling check-ins. I think weekly is a great cadence. It feels like, adding a weekly meeting to my to-do list, can feel like a lot, but keep it really short. And I'll talk about a suggested agenda for that meeting in a second. Use real-time documents. I think if you're going to use shared documents, if people are going to be editing content, or if you have a status sheet that you're keeping track of where things are, with a spreadsheet, or you have a project timeline, make them real-time live documents. Google Doc, Microsoft 365, whatever tool you've got, let people edit it. You can manage permissions on who gets to edit it, who gets to view it, if that's a problem or a concern. But making sure that everybody knows what's happening in real time will just reduce the stress, increase communication, and just make your project overall more nimble and flexible. And then over communicate. Even if you have a really small team, this is true. Tell people things at least 3 times. If you say it in a meeting, send it as a follow-up email, and then tell them again somehow, whether that's another email or another meeting where you're reiterating, what's happening, when's it happening, who's responsible for what. The more that you can communicate about your project, the better. And if you are a person who is, maybe wearing many hats on a project, you might consider still having a check-in meeting, but you're checking in with yourself. and you're using that time, 20 or 30 minutes a week, to review, okay, what's happening with my project? Do I have things that I'm behind on, or I need to reschedule? It's just give yourself the same space that you would give a team. And if you're working with a cross-functional team where there are people from other departments or inside and outside your organization, same thing. Use that time in that way to make sure everyone's on the same page, everyone knows what they're supposed to be doing, and we can move forward. And then the other part of that is the strategic collaboration. Um, I think asking for feedback when you really, really value it and you intend to put it to use is the best way. So when you look at the overall scope of your project and you look at the people who are involved, whether they're volunteers or people on your board or people in other departments, and you know that they want involvement, they want input, find meaningful places for them to participate on the front end of your project, and then build that into your project management process. Because it goes back to that over communicating piece. If somebody feels like their input is important and there's no place for them to give it, it will create a problem for your project. Maybe not immediately, but at some point along the way. So I think that it is important, even if it's a single page or content category. Maybe this person has a great design eye and you want them to weigh in on design, and this other person is a great detail-oriented person who can help you with bug testing at the end. Just be creative and think about how you can find a role for everyone, and they know when their role is coming, so that you get as much buy-in as possible. One of the things that I think people overlook with web projects is just how much buy-in is necessary for them to work. Because it's not just about doing the thing, it's about the web project being received well and utilized. And there's nothing worse than, investing months and months of effort in producing some piece of technology that your organization absorbs and then ignores because there was no excitement about it or there wasn't enough information about it. And so people don't feel a sense of ownership or a sense of support of you in creating that product. So be your own advocate and make sure people are excited about what's coming. In your weekly check-ins, here is an example agenda for how you can keep them efficient and effective. The first is roadblocks. What are the blockers? What are the things that are preventing people from moving forward? Maybe that's missing content or missing requirements for something that needs to be built out by an engineer. It could be a lot of things. Did we miss a deadline? Did anything get delayed? This is the place to voice that so that you can get support and help. And again, if you're doing these check-ins on your own, same deal. What roadblocks have I encountered and how am I going to solve for them? I don't think that as professionals we give ourselves enough space to do that thinking. We're in reactive mode all the time, and it's really stressful. And when you're wearing a lot of hats and you have a lot to do, your bandwidth for dealing with that constant barrage of input is lower. So if you can carve out 20 minutes in your week to think, okay, how can I get help? Or, what can I move to make this a priority? Just give yourself some space because these projects require endurance. They are marathons, not sprints. That's really what the next bullet speaks to is who needs help. Might be you, might be somebody else on the team, but really making it a comfortable, safe space for people to admit they need help and for the team to come together to figure out how they're going to fill that gap is a really helpful way to utilize these meetings. And then don't get caught up in the details of solving the problem in the meeting. Schedule a follow-up to do that. This 20 minutes should be, everybody should know that they're going to come into this meeting. It's going to be super efficient. They're going to get the help they need, and they're going to know what to do next. That's it. All the problems don't have to get solved in this session. So schedule the follow-up meetings that will actually lead to, fleshing out the details of those problems. And then ask people what went well. I think a lot of times we focus only on the negative stuff, but if everybody shares one awesome thing that happened last week, you're going to feel a lot better when you walk out of the room or exit from your Zoom than if everybody just is like, well, here's all the hard stuff. And then finally, avoid listing stuff. Don't turn these into a justification of existence. I feel like I've had plenty of team meetings where they turn into everybody going around the room and talking about the mountain of work they did last week. And I think we all have been in those meetings, and you wait for your turn and you have the things that you have to say, but you're not really engaged with what everybody else is saying because it's not relevant to you. They already did it. They don't need your help. It's not happening again. So what's the point? So if that starts to happen, if there's a person that's the instigator, pull them aside after the meeting and kind of reiterate, here's what, you don't need to do that. We appreciate your effort. Here's what we're trying to accomplish in this particular meeting. And if there are people who just want to list stuff, have them send you a list prior to the meeting and thank them for the list at the start of the meeting. And then ask for roadblocks. Like, you take control and ask people, what are the roadblocks? Who needs help? And so you're not inviting that list making that can happen, because you want to balance between having a really supportive environment where people can ask for help and just using time that could be better spent doing something else, So those are my check-in suggestions for you. Then the next section is preparing for launch. So, last week we talked a lot about content and how to organize it, and all the different ways to tell stories and the different types of projects. So if you're wondering, well, heck, what happens between check-ins and launch, I would definitely point back to that section. But as you're thinking about, okay, I've spent time building this thing that is now ready for the world, here are some ideas for getting it off the ground. Launch on a Monday. Mondays, a lot of museums are closed on Mondays, which is nice. It adds an extra benefit there. But no matter what, Mondays are usually a slower website traffic day. And then your team will be available all week to troubleshoot whatever thing might come up. I like to say sometimes that technology is like the ocean. You cannot control it. You can just ride the wave and respond. And you just never, ever know what's going to happen. And so the next item on this list is be prepared for bugs. And it's related. So, the thing that you built that was pristine and perfect, in the environment where it was built, and then it got moved over, or, the URL behind the scenes changed when you went live with your website. Well, just unexpected things can happen. So being prepared that there's going to be some issues that you're going to need to resolve, and really setting aside that week of launch. And I don't think that you really ever need a week. Usually it's just the first day or two that might be tricky, people finding things that because you were so close to the project you overlooked. But you want to allot some time for that, and you never want to launch on a Friday when everyone's gonna be excited, like, oh yeah, we launched the website, now it's the weekend and we're gonna go party. And if there's a problem on Saturday, it's a lot harder to get help. And obviously you also don't want to launch before you're about to go on vacation or some big event is happening in your life. Because same thing, you want to be able to respond if there's an emergency, to the extent that we have marketing emergencies, right? So I have created a bug reporting spreadsheet that I'll share with you in a second to help you kind of be prepared for those, and just go into launch with the expectation that there will be some. You can also use this for testing just as part of your overall process. But either way, it's good to have a mechanism to keep track of that stuff. And then finally, build in a staging environment. And this is another technical resource kind of thing, but don't ever allow somebody to build your project locally on their computer. And, this is something I put in here in writing so that you would have it and know to ask about it as you're talking to the person who's going to be doing the building. There's so much risk involved when those files are locally on somebody's computer. Something could happen to their computer and your project is lost. It's just not good. There are a lot of reasons why people might want to do it. It's convenient, keeps everything easy to work with and manage, and reduces the time of like moving files around. But it's much, much better to have something that's backed up in the cloud, whether it's on a managed hosting provider or a server somewhere. Those are the best ways to go. Okay, so here's the bug reporting template. It's a very simple spreadsheet. I'm actually going to exit out of my presentation for just 1 second so that I can show you the whole thing and kind of talk through the different parts. Ooh, that's the wrong window. It's very meta. Okay, so it's useful to give bugs an ID number because you can refer back to that ID number, and if duplicates get added, you can know that this is a duplicate of item number 12, and so you can kind of keep track of all the stuff that's coming in. Page name, pretty obvious, right? And the URL that it's found on. A description of the issue, making that as descriptive as it can be is really helpful. Who reported it? So if there are questions, the person working this issue can go back to that person to get more information if needed. And then the device, operating system, and browser are only really needed if there are really kind of display issues. For example, if an image is getting cut off when you view a site on mobile phone, like it's helpful for the person fixing it to know that you're on an iPhone and it's this operating system, right? And you're in Safari. But that's not always that important. If the people who are giving you feedback are struggling to provide that information, it's okay to omit it. It's just, if it's available, it's really great information to have, and it can make your process more efficient, especially if you're working with an external technical partner who needs to resolve it for you. And then assign to, there are a lot of reasons why, like this example that I've provided here of a missing image caption, this would go back to the content lead, to be resolved, right? If it was a technical problem, it gets assigned to the technical lead, right? And then it can also be reassigned as people are going back and forth to try to solve the problem, which is another great reason why having this as a real-time document makes it so much more an effective tool. And then finally, a checkbox for resolved, and then notes field. And you can customize this. You can make yourself a copy and add or delete fields as you see fit for your project. But this is a great place to start. And even as you're heading up to launch of your project and you're having a small group of testers kind of test the final product before you launch, this is a great tool to use at that phase of the project too. Or after you launch, if you're getting feedback, this is a great way to keep track of it. All right, let me go back in here. All right, so as I mentioned earlier, project communication is super, super important. So some do's and don'ts: definitely send an internal email ahead of launch, notifying anybody who is a volunteer, a board member, a staff member, people who support you and will be excited about this project happening. Let them know that it's launching. Maybe you would like their help in clicking around and testing the site out. Maybe there are specific features or additions that you want to call attention to. This is your chance to really do that and have people be excited about everything that you've worked hard to complete. I don't recommend sending an external email, which I know is kind of a controversial idea. Usually, when you launch a new website, it is about an improved user experience. There might be reasons why you would want to communicate to people if the way that they access their member benefits has changed, right? That's more of like a customer service oriented email. But generally speaking, like we've launched a new website isn't really news anymore in the way that it used to be. And that kind of goes to the next bullet point about not issuing press releases related to them. It's just unfortunately not as significant news externally as it is internally to us. When you've lived and breathed these projects for months and months and you bring them to life, um, it's frustrating when there's not a lot of external notice, of that. But there are things you can do instead, like share special features of your new site on your social media feed. If you have a new virtual exhibit content, or you have upgraded membership tools, or streamlined mobile ticketing, like those are all things you can take screenshots, talk about on social, and get people excited about how you've improved your content or the experience for them. And that will work really well for you. Um, I would also say do have a launch party where you're celebrating your team's hard work. Um, I worked for a company that always did launch parties every time we launched a website, and there were always toy rockets and prizes and awards for the work people did. And, it's just really nice when you've invested a lot of time over, months of working together to acknowledge the work that people did and the obstacles that they overcame. I think this is similar to how you might feel about an exhibit. It's the same um, scale often of effort. It looks a little different in how it comes together. But some of these projects go on for as long and have as much complexity. So it's worth celebrating for sure when you finish one of these projects. All right, I'm gonna make sure we get through the post-launch maintenance. So, okay, you've put this thing out into the world, and now what? um, First, breathe in the success of completing your project, right? Take a moment to take a breath and enjoy that. And don't just let it escape without notice. And, the party is kind of a way to manifest that tangibly. So in order to make the site or web project work as best it can for you, get hands-on with it right away. So if you have a content management system, WordPress or something else, to manage content, the week after launch, you should be in there doing that. And as soon as you receive training, get in there, create future content that you're saving as drafts, edit something that you notice needs updating, whatever it is, because the longer you wait to make edits, the harder it's going to be to figure out how. Like the further away you get from it, I've seen this time and time again where a big project gets launched and a group of people, sometimes 10 people receive training and nobody logs in, and a year later no one knows how to, and that is the worst thing, because you've invested in these tools to make the site work for you, and you really want to take advantage of everything that it has to offer. The other thing is keep up with security, and there are a couple of ways to do this. Make sure that whoever's hosting your website is providing automatic security updates, and if you are using what's called a managed hosting provider, they usually will. So that's something that you can look for or ask your technical lead for as you're putting these projects together, because you don't want to get hacked and have user data compromised, or somebody, hijack your website. And, especially if you're using WordPress, it's very important, because WordPress has so much market share. It's like the difference between Macs and PCs. There's so many more viruses and attacks on PCs because they have the most market share. More people have them. And so because more people have them, there are more people in the world trying to create viruses and hack into them because the return on investment of time is better. It's just and so web security is really similar, right? And it shouldn't deter you from using those popular tools. It's just be smart about it and make sure that you have a plan after launch to make sure that your security updates stay clear so that you're not vulnerable to any of that stuff that will happen. And that goes for your plugins too. If you're using plugins, it's a good reason to be careful about the plugins that you add to your site because they often are the culprit of these vulnerabilities. So use one that has as many users as you can find. Like when you look at WordPress, for example, you can see how many downloads, how many installations. Is it up to date with the latest version of WordPress? And if the answer is like, yeah, 10,000 people have used it or downloaded it this month and 100,000 people have installed it and it's been updated in the last month, that's probably pretty safe. But if it hasn't been updated in a year and it only has 500 installs, not so safe. And then consider a maintenance plan. Typically, if you're hiring a technical partner for your web project, they can give you a maintenance plan in this $500 to $2,000 a year range, depending on the size of your project. And that will ensure that you have somebody to call if something goes wrong. There's somebody to help you navigate through that, but also somebody looking out for you and making sure that you stay up to date with those security updates, both for your plugins and your content management system. And then also don't forget about content. Technology has enough complexity in and of itself that we often give it a lot of time and attention in our thinking as we're doing these projects. And if we're thinking ahead and we think about, oh, what do I need to do to maintain this technology? But also be thinking about, what do I need to do to maintain the content on this site? So as you're building your overall content plan, consider this +1 month idea. Okay, here's the launch plan for content for our site. And then here's what the month after launch will look like. And we're going to prepare that content for the launch date. And that will help you kind of have some momentum as you're building all that content and getting it ready. You're just doing that +1 month as well, so that you can start putting processes in place as you're doing this project that will make it successful after it launches. And the transition, the check-in meeting is a way to do that. You have this weekly meeting, you're doing it, it's helping you keep the project on track. And then you can just naturally transition it to, okay, what are the updates that we need to make on the site? Whether you're doing a second phase or you just want to make sure that content stays fresh and, new events get added, new exhibits get added, that weekly check-in can just be transitioned to do that for you. Okay, whew, I feel like I talked up a storm there. I feel like this one was the hardest one to put together because there's so many facets and elements that we could have talked about. So I'm really curious about your questions, and I'll definitely be in the forums. So here's how you can connect with me if you have questions about something I did not cover. And then obviously on the Museum Learning Hub, you can definitely ask your questions in the forum there, and I'll be able to answer them if we do not have time to get to them now. I will say there's one thing that I did not put in this presentation that I wrote a note to myself I wanted to be sure to say, and that is when you are a project manager, especially if you're a non-technical resource, it can be really daunting when a technical person says to you, that's not possible. And I learned very early on in my career to respond with, everything is possible given enough time and money, so which one do we need? And you might not have the time nor the money, but by making it clear that you understand that all things are pretty much possible, it will change the tone of the conversation. So I'm going to leave it with that, and I'll be happy to take questions.
Well, thanks, Despy. That was awesome. Appreciate the presentation. We do have a few questions here ready for you this time around. So first, easy one, I guess. Any tips or words of wisdom for the folks interested in setting up business-related operations like a online store or ticket purchases?
Oh my gosh, what's a wisdom? I would say do not try to build custom solutions. I think that is super hard, and there are so many solutions out there. So be willing to compromise and find something that does most of the things really well, and lean into that, because supporting custom technology is super hard, it's super expensive. So just find the thing that will do the best job, and make it work.
Words of wisdom. How much archival research material can a small museum realistically include on its website? And can some materials be stored in the cloud? Or is this too much to attempt without professional tech people on staff?
That's a great question. I think, I assume by archival material, you mean documents, photographs, that sort of thing. I would suggest using a system that manages those files and makes them available online, and then you could link to that. There are lots of digital asset management systems out there that allow you to catalog those materials in a thoughtful way and then make them available. If you're trying to add them to your site, I would kind of refer back to, it depends on why you're adding them. Last week I talked about using your blog as a place to highlight that kind of material that has like fun stuff or interesting ideas or important things about current events, just whatever the case might be. Right. You could feature those special documents or objects on your blog. But if you just have a huge catalog of stuff that you want to make available for research purposes, I think a digital asset management system is the way to go. And often you can just get a link that, people can use the tool to search. I don't know, but I feel like I want to ask 100 more questions. But I know
that's the tough part about this one way.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll move on to the next one, and if there's a follow up that can help, then I invite the submitters to follow. Yes. How have organizations you worked with continued to engage their audiences after their website launched? If your website is going to continuously update with new information, how do we let people know what's new?
I would say that relates to what your overall marketing strategy is, generally speaking. For a lot of people, that's either email or social media or some combination of the two. I think that in general, people don't just pop onto your website to see what's new. Like they just have too much going on in their heads and their lives. So you have to push them there. And so I would say social media updates and if you have an e-newsletter or e-news alerts, that sort of thing.
Cool. Nice. Okay. While buy-in from an entire team is important, how many people do you think is too many for a web team?
Great question. Just as few as humanly possible is awesome. I think if there's a person in the room who doesn't ever have anything to do, they shouldn't be there, So the number is less important than is everybody actively participating. And if somebody just wants to be there to get updates, like there's lots of ways to get updates. So I don't know if it's a number, but I think that, once a group of any people trying to do anything gets to be more than like 7 or 8 people, it starts to become not as helpful. But you'll know, like I said, if somebody's sitting there and they never have anything to contribute, nor are they ever assigned anything, they probably don't need to be there.
Makes sense. Okay. What are some ongoing maintenance tips for new websites?
So I think that for new websites, often it's more about Do we have all the content that we need, and are people engaging with it in the way that we expected? So I definitely would recommend using Google Analytics or whatever analytics tool that you preference to track, what pages are getting viewed, um, how long are people on those pages, what are they clicking on, and then you get a sense of how people are interacting with the site. And I often tell people analytics will not tell you what's wrong. It only tells you there is something wrong. And then you have to start asking questions that you answer in a different way. So, I would really say if you notice, for example, that you had a goal of redesigning or creating a new website in order to drive traffic to your physical location and nobody's going to the visit page, you got a problem, because that is the key element to the goal that you had. So it can tell you things like that, and then you can start troubleshooting why is that happening, and I think that kind of maintenance is so much more important than anything else because it tells you, has your project been successful? The technical maintenance that I talked about, I think, is applicable to a new site or an older site. Just make sure that you're keeping that stuff updated, and just know that those updates come in real time. They're not necessarily scheduled quarterly or monthly or whatever. So you got to really keep an eye on it to make sure that you stay safe. And the other part of keeping things updated is also, if you've ever worked in a place where you've started a job and they have a website that's been around for like 8 years and no one has ever updated the CMS in that time, and you try to update it, everything will break. Because in that time, technology has changed so dramatically that, it's no longer, like, it's not even, it's like apples and oranges. You're trying to update, you're trying to make this apple an orange, and it won't go. So by doing those incremental updates, even right after you launch a new thing, like, you're protecting yourself from that experience later.
Yeah. So I feel you on that one.
I think a lot of us have probably been there if we've ever, worked with websites we didn't build.
Yeah. If you've been around long enough, you see it once or twice, right?
Yeah, of course.
We have one more question, and then I'll do the final bit of housekeeping. Thank you so much for doing the 3 technical presentation, Dusty. I think it's been awesome, and I know our team agrees. All right, last question here. You mentioned plugins for WordPress and some items to avoid when looking for a good plugin. Any other tips or tricks for finding the right plugin, or how do you evaluate the plugin developer, for instance?
Yeah, so you can look, for WordPress particularly, you can click and see what other things that developer, just by clicking on there, you can see what other things they've made. I tend to look at the screenshots and read the documentation, and also go and look at the support. So, when you are looking at a plugin in WordPress, there are usually these tabs that have documentation, support, reviews, illustrations, or screenshots. And by looking at all that stuff, you get a sense, are people complaining to this person every day that they haven't fixed X, Y, or Z thing?
Sure.
You see what typically goes wrong with it. The screenshots will show you in more detail, like what fields or features are available, so you can determine if it's what you're really looking for. But honestly, sometimes I end up installing one, trying it out, deleting it, installing another one, trying it out, if it's not the right thing. And I don't feel any kind of way about doing that. I think it's fine to experiment with them, because in some cases, like if you're trying to add a particular feature, there might be 100 plugins that could do that. And so I would start with number of downloads, best reviews, and then, experiment with what's going to work best. Because sometimes also things just lay out better, like the template that you're using can make a difference in how the thing looks or works. So a little bit of trial and error.
Awesome. Okay. Any last thoughts or words for us? You've been with us for a few hours this month, so maybe a final thought.
I appreciate it. Like I said, I had a really great time putting these together and really thinking about how to be most helpful. I hope that everybody's found this to be helpful, and I'm definitely open to more questions. Like I said, if there are aspects I didn't cover, I'm happy to have community convo about it. Yeah.
Great. Great. That's a great segue into the few things that I have to mention right here at the end. But I really appreciate you being here today. It's been a real pleasure to get to know you through this.
Thanks, Justin.
Thank you. All right. Well, thanks to all for attending today's program on our Managing the Project edition of Managing Website Projects. As Despy mentioned, there's a forum for the current module. Any questions, any ongoing dialogue can be found and added there. And thank you very much for joining us for the final of Technical Workshop of Module 4. Have a great week.